Caught in a blizzard, 3 people sought shelter, found much more than they bargained for as they entered the Twilight Zone in Chugwater, Wyoming. The Pioneers of Outlaw Country, cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws, to the businessmen and women who all helped shape Wyoming. Here are their stories. Welcome to a special season of Haunted Wyoming. The Twilight Zone in Chugwater, Wyoming.
Welcome to Season 4 of the Pioneers of Outlaw Country. I am your host, Jackie Dorothy, and we are about to embark on a spooky journey across Wyoming. This is the most terrifying season yet as we explore the haunted history of the Equality State. The wind blew the snow across the highway as a blizzard raged. This squall sent 3 people desperate for shelter into the rural town of Chugwater. When they finally found a place out of the storm, they had no idea that they were stepping into a different dimension. Welcome to the Twilight Zone Restaurant. Deborah D. Munn researched this tale for her book, Wyoming Ghost Stories, Eerie, True Tales. It was one of the most baffling supernatural occurrences that took place in Wyoming in March 1959. Munn's story of accidental time travel is shrouded in mystery. The people involved did not want their identities revealed, and those who would know the true story are now gone. We may never know what really happened in Chugwater that stormy day in March. For now, we invite you to enjoy this trip to the past where a blinding Wyoming snowstorm led to the Twilight Zone. An airman was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado in 1959. He had just been given leave to go visit his wife, who was living in Moreland. His friends, a married couple, joined him on the road trip. Just as the 3 were leaving the Cheyenne city limits, a blinding spring blizzard struck. The snowstorm made road conditions almost impossible to navigate, and it took over an hour and a half to reach Chugwater, which was 45 miles from Cheyenne. The storm was getting worse, and they were grateful when they finally made out the dim lights ahead, signaling a safe place to weather out the tempest. "We were so glad to find a place to come in out of the storm and have dinner," the airman later told Munn. "We pulled off to the left side of the road and walked across the building. I believe that we went through some swinging doors there in the front, and I remember that we were the only 3 having dinner at the time. The help were there, the cook, dishwasher, and others, but we were the only customers." The restaurant was quite pleasant, with white linen tablecloths, silverware, and tall water glasses at each place setting. 2 young women dressed in long dresses with black and white aprons waited on us. After getting a beer for each of them, the men ordered steak while the wife had chicken. The meal was ordinary, and there didn't appear to be anything odd about their food. When the 3 got their bill, they were pleasantly surprised when it came to only $9. Feeling generous, the airman left a $5 tip and was rewarded with shocked delight from the waitresses. The waitresses thanked him and walked the 3 to the door. They cautioned them all to be careful since it was still snowing so hard that one could barely see. Once again, they entered the storm, anticipating a white-knuckle drive. However, once they got on the other side of Chugwater and close to Douglas, the storm suddenly lifted. They made it to Worland without any further incident. In Worland, the airman and his friends told his wife and her parents about this nice restaurant that they had found. They decided to revisit it on their way back to Denver the next week. The airman's wife joined them on the return trip. The weather and roads were clear, and it was an easy trip to Chugwater. The highway took travelers right through the middle of town, and the airman drove the now familiar street to the restaurant. He pulled into the same parking spot he had used before and sat in the car, stunned. He remembered that as they had come down the hill from Denver, heading north, the restaurant had been the third or fourth business on the left-hand side of the street. But this time, it just wasn't there. There wasn't even any building on the side. They were looking at a vacant lot. Unable to believe what they were not seeing, the airman and his friend walked up to a nearby hamburger stand and spoke to an elderly gentleman. "I think his name was Charlie," the airman said. "I told him that we had come through Chugwater and eaten at a restaurant that was no longer there."
Pardon me?
Charlie was said to have asked.
Are you sure this is where you were?
"I'm positive," the airman had replied. "That's right where I parked."
When was this?
Charlie asked. The airman noticed that the older man had a funny look on his face. 8 days ago," he replied.
Son, the place you described burned down years and years ago. This has been a vacant lot since then.
"There's no way," the airman responded. "We were just in there." He began to describe both of the waitresses to Charlie in convincing detail and was interrupted with a sad shake of Charlie's head.
Son, that place burned down and the two people you described perished in the fire. But that was years and years ago.
The airman looked over at his friend to see if they were both hearing the same thing. His friend had turned pale. They looked at each other and fled Chugwater. Back on the road, the airman's wife was convinced the three others were trying to pull a joke on her. The other wife became visibly upset and insisted they were telling the truth. "It was only then that I believed them," the airman's wife said. "After all these years, their story has never changed." The airman said that if his friends hadn't been there to corroborate his story, he would not believe it himself. They all immediately tried to rationalize the experience away and thought at first that they had been in another rural town. However, there were no other towns on the route, and everything else about Chugwater had been the same, except for the missing restaurant. The three witnesses agreed that the food had been real, the restaurant a solid place, and their host had not been ghostly. One theory that seemed to make the most sense, though still very bizarre, was that they had somehow slipped back into the past. There is a newspaper story that fits the scenario that Charlie had suggested. He had told the airman about a restaurant burning down years and years ago, and indeed, a restaurant had burned down 34 years prior. The Wyoming State Tribune reported in May 1925 that a fire had started in a restaurant about 1:30 a.m. from an undetermined origin. 3 buildings were destroyed in Chugwater until the blaze was finally extinguished at 9 a.m. that same morning. The pool hall underneath the restaurant was destroyed, as was the rooming house above the restaurant, the editor wrote. Guests were forced to flee in scanty attire. Author Munn did further research, and she interviewed old-timers from Chugwater. Resident Russell L. Statz had checked his diary and discovered that on March 25th, 1959, Chugwater had gotten 9 inches of snow, evidence of a spring blizzard that the airmen said happened. Stats also believe that a restaurant had existed at one time in the area that the airmen had described. Residents Tim and Peggy Dries told Munn almost every business in the rural town had burned to the ground in the first part of the century, although no one remembers any deaths. Another resident remembered a man who used to roam around Chugwater that fit the description of the Charlie in the airman's story. The incident does remain a mystery to this day. The airman and his friends are adamant that they really did eat in the restaurant, and nothing, not even their own logic, can convince them otherwise. Thanks for joining me on this special Haunted Wyoming edition of Pioneers of Outlaw Country. These ghostly tales and strange happenings remind us that history can be terrifying. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into Wyoming's haunted past, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future stories of pioneers, outlaws, and the legends that shaped the West. If you have your own eerie Wyoming story, I'd love to hear it. Just contact me at jackie@legendrockmedia.com. Until next time, keep fresh batteries in your flashlight. You never know what might be waiting in the shadows of Outlaw Country. I'm Jackie Dorothy, unearthing the ghosts and legends that still ride the Wyoming winds. This episode of Pioneers of Outlaw Country, Haunted Wyoming History, is brought to you by Rooted in Legacy, my memoir coaching business. We all have stories worth telling, tales of family, grit, love, and resilience. But too often, those stories fade away because they were never written down. That's where I come in. At Rooted in Legacy, I help you preserve your life story or your loved ones, so it will not be forgotten. Together, we'll turn memories into a lasting legacy that future generations can hold on to. If you've been wanting to preserve those family stories but didn't know where to start, I'd love to help. My website is legendrockmedia.com, or just follow the link in the show notes to schedule a free call with me, personally. Rooted in Legacy, because every story deserves to be told. This has been a production of Legend Rock Media.